arbitrary HTTP headers. We said that attack surface is insane. You're going to spend the next 5 to 10 years patching holes in it. Ultimately, sites don't need that level of functionality. If we provide a simple way to do an HTTP request against another site in such a way that we can provably show that it doesn't increase the attack surface of the browser, we've done a great thing. That's what XDomain request is. We put it out to the standards bodies and we said, we think you should standardize on this instead. Done some other work around getting code not to execute. MIME sniffing. Anybody in the room know what MIME sniffing is? Okay. Different audience, I guess. Good. We made it better. File upload control. The file upload control has historically been a huge source of security vulnerabilities. Basically, for the last 15 years, the history of browsers, essentially, the file upload control has been always of interest to attackers because they found all sorts of tricks to get it to steal files off your local file system. So we made some changes here in IE8 to reduce that attack surface. Puts us in line with the other browsers and helps ensure that files can't be stolen when you just go visit a website. Now, got 13 minutes left. I've been talking nonstop for quite a while. Privacy is a really interesting thing. And the reason I want to go through privacy super quickly is because it turns out people care a lot about privacy. When we were planning IE8, we said, what are your top concerns? And privacy was actually pretty high. Now, it's very interesting because there's two types of privacy we found. There's privacy, the over-the-shoulder shared PC privacy. I don't want people in my house to know what I visit. And then there's also aggregator privacy. I don't want some big major advertiser with their content and tons of web pages across the internet tracking me. I don't want a beacon to go out and notify my social network every time I go buy something and potentially let my friends know what their birthday gifts are. So there's two types of privacy. And in recognition of that, we've got a couple of features. The first thing we did, holdover from IE7, essentially the post-facto privacy. I've done some surfing, sensitive nature, did some banking, did some downloads. I don't want that content to linger around. Maybe I'm on a kiosk machine, maybe I'm on a friend's machine. We've beefed up the delete browsing history function with a new option to preserve favorite website data. So what this means is you can easily check an option where the sites that you care about, your favorites, we maintain state, and everything else gets blown away. And so if you're concerned, some random website search engine is tracking me or whatnot, you can just make sure that you don't have it as a favorite, and then you can set the option to delete browser history every time you exit and preserve your favorites. And in that way, you've got control over the profile that's built up of you on your machine. Now, we've got two new features that are under the in-private brand. One is called in-private browsing, one's called in-private blocking. In-private browsing is the shared PC case. I want to go do some browsing off the record. Pretty meaningful for me. I just got engaged. Did some engagement ring shopping. My girlfriend, now fiance, shares my PC. I don't want her to know that I'm looking at rings, and I certainly don't want her to see which rings I'm looking at. It's supposed to be a surprise. It's pretty easy now. File, new private browsing session, good to go. In-private blocking we'll get to in just a second. In-private browsing, basically a screenshot here, pretty easy to launch, iexplore.exe-private. In-private browsing turns on. Your browser doesn't keep track of cookies anymore. All permanent cookies are downgraded to session cookies. Your temporary files that are created during that session are removed when that session is closed. We don't keep track of history. And one of the important things is we don't actually keep track of visited links. So in Jeremiah's talk this morning, he was talking about the CSS history attack, where you can just put a ton of links in a page and then use CSS to figure out, has the user been there? Or you can use JavaScript to see whether or not the color of the link is such, has the user been there? That attack doesn't work in private mode because in private mode, we don't keep track of visited links. So this is great either way. If you go to bad sites in private, they can't see anything about your normal browsing sessions because visited links are disabled. Similarly, if you visit your banking sites and so forth in private, and then you visit the untrustworthy sites in normal IE, they can't get the session data from the in-private instance because it wasn't created. And so there's a mitigation against that attack. There's a bunch of attacks that allow this type of thing. The browser is a very intricate platform, but here's one feature that chips away at that. Next problem we looked at is the aggregation problem. And the reason aggregation is interesting is because it's a problem a lot of people don't really realize they have, but when they find out, they get very uncomfortable. So here's just a normal user. He visits a site, and that site actually introduces some third-party content. Maybe it's an ad, maybe it's a, an Ajax library, maybe it's just an icon saying, hey, add me to your visited links or your favorite links, dig like, things like that. And he says, okay, whatever. He doesn't understand. He just sees one URL in the address bar. He doesn't see the third-party content coming across the wire. There's a problem, though, because if it goes to another site, that other site may have the same relationship. In fact, there may be a lot of sites that have that relationship. Now, the problem is the user doesn't necessarily see this third-party relationship. And in fact, they don't have any trust relationship at all with this third party. But this third party is able to see their use of the internet across all the sites that they care about. So they can put together a profile. They can say, well, he's a male. We think he's between 25 and 35. He likes sports. They can put together a massive amount of data. And you don't even need cookies for this. P3P doesn't help you here because it turns out there's so many different ways of communicating unique identifiers that the network communication itself is dangerous. And so IE8 in private mode introduces the in-private blocking feature, where you can either have Internet Explorer automatically determine where these third-party trackers are and let you control whether or not they're hit, or you can subscribe to an RSS feed. So there's going to be privacy-conscious organizations that put out lists of the tracker sites. And you can subscribe to a block list and actually get that content blocked. And then lastly, you can just manually block it yourself. If there's a site that you don't trust to have tracking you, you can put in this do not call list, if you will, and Internet Explorer will no longer retrieve content from that site. So that was a quick roadshow of the features, blew through it way faster than normal. Normally this is a 2-hour talk. But the other thing I wanted to talk about very briefly before Q&A is what does the future look like? What does the browser future look like? We've done IE8, we're not done yet. What's coming next? Turns out the future is kind of scary. And the reason the future is scary is because of the incentives in play in the world right now. So I was talking earlier, that cool attack where you go and you clickjack someone and now you've got access to their microphone and camera. It's awesome. Why does it work? Well, it works because Flash provides access to the microphone and camera. Why does Flash provide access to the microphone and camera? Because it can, because HTML can't. How do you sell Flash? The product. You make it do things HTML can't, right? If you could only do things you could do in HTML and Flash, why would anyone ever use Flash? The whole point of these plugins is to do things the browser can't, because it makes the browser more powerful. The problem is, there's often cases where the browser can't do something because it's either a huge attack surface or it can't be done safely. Now, I know guys on these add-on teams, and they're super smart guys, and I like the stuff they're doing, but they're adding significant attack surface to the browser. Well, the problem is it's all competitive. So you got Flash out there. We've added a bunch of attack surface to the browser. Any other framework that wants to compete with Flash has to offer the same capabilities, because if they don't, no one will use it. Just get Flash, it works. Standards guys have a problem with this. They don't like Flash, they don't like Silverlight, they don't like proprietary languages. They say everything should be in standards-based web platform. And they go out to web designers and they say, do everything standards-based. And they say, well, like to, but Flash does some stuff you can't. The HTML guys say, oh, what is it? We'll add it. HTML5 has a lot of really dangerous proposals. Socket access, rich mashup capabilities going cross-domain. There's a ton of things in HTML5 that are super scary. And that's fine. HTML5 is basically becoming a spec for an operating system rather than an HTML spec. But we have to be really careful that we understand how all of these different pieces come together. Because, visited links, the attack for clickjacking, all of these things have been around forever, and it's just the interaction of essentially introducing a bad guy into a capability system where the capabilities interact in surprising ways, where you get these dangerous, dangerous architectures. This is right now how I feel about some of the standards work. It's great, but it's very precarious, because if any one thing fails, everything falls over. Right now, HTML is totally safe against attacks against your microphone and your webcam because HTML can't reach them. As soon as it can, it becomes far more interesting. Problem, so you got to be secure by design, you got to be secure by default, you got to be secure in deployment. Design problems suck really bad. The reason design problems suck really bad is because often you can't fix them. Clickjacking is going to be extremely hard for the browsers to fix because the web is kind of meant to work that way. So that's going to be a real problem. So we have to be very careful that we just don't spackle over design problems. We consider them very early in the development cycle. So we've got 4 minutes left for questions. Hopefully someone has questions. Anyone? If any of the new people walking into the room have questions, they can ask. Yes?
So you're implementing a lot of sort of defense for the end users, especially with your anti-cross-site scripting technology, which is very good for the end users.
Yes.
However, do you feel that this will have an impact on developers? So if I was a developer, I would say, well, why do I care about cross-site scripting? I'll write my code, I'll just spat it out because the browser will protect me. Don't you think you're dumbing down developers?
Are we dumbing down developers? This actually comes up. They say, hey, Microsoft has an anti-cross-site scripting filter. Are they dumbing down developers? I wish. The reality is that, well, there's a separate argument as to whether or not certain classes of developers could be dumbed down. But there's a bigger problem with this notion that you can easily poke a hole in the logic of we don't need to fix XSS bugs. And that easy hole to fix is basically Internet Explorer 8 right now has, I think it's something like 0.5% of browser market share. When we launch Internet Explorer 8, it might have 1% of browser market share immediately. Internet Explorer 6 is still the second most popular browser in the world.
Okay,
so the reality is...
This is the trend. So you're saying 8, you're doing this. 9, you're going to have even more layers of protection. By 10,
Sure.
developers, then there's no need to actually write secure.
I would absolutely love it if in the browser, we could make the browser so secure that there's nothing a web developer could write that would be insecure. I would love that. My customers would love that. IT would love that. Because I would say, install IE10, and the web dev can do whatever he wants, and it will be perfectly secure. It's never, ever going to happen, but I would retire a very happy person if that would be the case. And so, yes, and it's important. The other thing to keep in mind is, back 50 slides ago, talking about balance. One of the key things that we have to balance is compat and security. If we break anything that needs to work by default, people will not upgrade. The primary way to get around this problem without throwing yet another dialog box in the user's face is putting it in the developer's control. And so earlier, Jeremiah mentioned the content restrictions proposals that are out there. We think content restrictions are cool. The reason that they're cool is because the web developer is in control. The end user doesn't make a security decision. The web developer says, hey, here's how my page works, here's the JavaScript that I use, here are the capabilities I want, and if you see any request for anything else, just fail it immediately. So that requires developers to have a deeper understanding. And we are outreaching to developers and saying, hey, we've got this new static HTML stuff. We've got this new JSON stuff. And usually the pitch is more than security. The JSON stuff is somewhere between 5 and 50 times faster than what people are doing today. So you know what? If you don't do it for security, do it for performance. And so engaging developers in these conversations is absolutely critical to the IE team. But I'm not worried too much about dumbing down developers because there's so many different attacks. There's so many different things for them to keep track of. And we've been very, very clear. You've just got to make these things work. And you've got to keep your users secure because not everybody's going to be running the most secure version of the browser. And you need defense in depth. You need to provide defense in depth because there's no mitigation in the world that's perfect. And so if you've got this attack surface, see if you can remove it. If you can't remove it, what can you put on top to protect the user? Last question. Yes? Can you come up? I can't hear you, unfortunately.
Very quickly, anything about proxies and reverse proxies with IE8?
Anything about proxies and reverse proxies?
Yeah,
So
would there be any impact on current development?
Nothing has changed in terms of our proxy handling. So Probably not.
Probably not at all.